yell announcements and things at you while you get food. So I think the food is here. It's ready to be had, so everyone can shuffle through the line. We have a lot of people here today, so don't grab your seconds first. Leave first for everybody first, and then get seconds later. Cool. Well, thanks for coming. Real quick, thanks for joining us today. So we're here thanks to sponsors. Where's Tara, Tilly, Marshall? Okay, so Tara has news to share. Thank you, Tech Systems. And
wanted to say thanks for letting us come every month. We really appreciate getting to know you guys and everything. As I'm sure you guys have started to recognize my recruiting partner, Sarah Tilly, over here. I wanted to give her a quick shout out. She's been recruiting for about 4 months now, and she just got her first placement today where she found somebody a job.
Woo!
So I wanted to let you guys know so we could all give her a quick shout out.
Woo!
And thanks for letting us go.
Cool. And also we have Blixa is here with his company, Project Make It. He's helping us out with the streaming, so all the streaming and capture stuff is his. Woo! And you have a pitch too, right?
Yeah, so Project Make It is looking for a front-end web developer. So if you're in the market, looking for junior or senior, doesn't matter.
Cool. All right. So just check with you, right? Just find you if you're interested.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so we're also here because there's a ton of volunteers. So if you're on like a Techlahoma board or a Techlahoma team of some kind, or you do some Techlahoma stuff, just raise your hand if you're in the room and do Techlahoma stuff. So yes, a lot of these people around here. There's Yaya. Why is your hand down? So there's a lot of people here. Julia, I know, does Django Girls coaching. How many Django Girls coaches are here tonight? Okay, so all these people are doing Techlahoma stuff too. So the other thing about Techlahoma people is they don't even brag on themselves about how much work they do. But Techlahoma is made up of awesome volunteers who give their time to just share knowledge about technology. So we're also here because speakers like Carson came from OKC today. There's Carson, put your hand up. So Carson volunteered to come over from OKC to talk about progressive web apps because that was a topic that a lot of people wanted to hear about. So he's doing that. So Techlahoma is a nonprofit volunteer organization that does about 30 monthly meetups. Every month we do 2 big conferences, and we sponsor like free local events. Like this weekend we're doing Django Girls Tulsa. So a lot of that stuff is put on by a lot of the people that are in this room, and a lot of things you're going to hear about, cool things that are going on, are happening because Techlahoma puts them on, and we get sponsorships, we get donations. So if you want to donate to Techlahoma, go to donate.techlahoma.org. Or if your company wants to sponsor Techlahoma, you can go, I think, to the same site. Kendall, is it the same site? And you just click on, is it for sponsors? Do they go to donate? Sure. Go somewhere. Or just, or talk to Kendall. She's the treasurer, so just hand the money straight to her. So you can also buy merchandise from there. There's a store. And then lastly, I always forget about this one. If you use Amazon Smile, is like their nonprofit thing. Techlahoma is in Amazon Smile, so if you set up your nonprofit charity in smile.amazon.com to be Techlahoma, we get some of that. We also, if you have Amazon Prime or you have Twitch Prime, and you can do a subscription, we have a channel, Techlahoma Foundation, on Twitch, and that can help send some money to Techlahoma too. So there's a bunch of ways that you can help out supporting Techlahoma doing all this stuff. Also, we're here because 36 Degrees North is the building you're in, and they donate the space for us to meet. They also have lots of free workshops, and they do co-working. Is this Wednesday is free co-working? Who's at their desk? I can't even see. Is this Wednesday free co-working? Yes, I get a thumbs up from the front desk. So yes, this Wednesday, if you want to check this place out as a co-working spot, the co-working happens like out here at all the tables and desks and all that stuff. So check that out. There's a ton of other tech meetups that happen in this space. That's on the 36 Degrees North calendar. And when you signed in, they have a newsletter thing. The newsletter is really good. It's not spammy. It's like on Monday morning, they send you like what's going on here this week. So if you want to hear about all the stuff that happens here, that's a good one to sign up for. All right, am I missing anything before we get into all the regulars, right? That's all the regulars? Okay. So Thunder Plains 2018, this is Web Developer Conference in Oklahoma City. Well, web developer, it's like a lot of JavaScript, web and not web, and then it also has a lot of web in it. But this will be November 1st. It's in Oklahoma City. Their CFP for speakers is open. So if you like to give talks about technology, then submit to their CFP. Their sponsorship prospectus is also open, so they're currently looking for sponsors. So if your company wants to sponsor, that's another good thing. The events like Thunder Plains are also good money makers for Techlahoma. So the ticket sales and the sponsorships, whatever we make extra, gets to go to programs like Django Girls and stuff like that. That's Thunder Plains, and then July 18th is Tulsa Open Source Hardware. Is anyone here from Tulsa Open Source Hardware? Blixa, do you know what they're doing?
Not really. Something about Bluetooth, but the guy didn't actually post it. All the information is on the meetup, so find it there.
Okay.
Other than that,
And that's Wednesday evening, but it's not here, is it? It's
no, it's again that information.
Is it New
on
Media?
I don't actually know the name of the location.
So if you're into hardware, check out Tulsa Open Source Hardware, and their meetup has all the info that Blixa and I do not. Okay, and then this Friday is Tulsa Tech Fest. Who's been to Tulsa Tech Fest before? All right, so Tulsa Tech Fest is probably the biggest tech event that happens in town, I think, looking around. They have like 400, 500 people regularly. Some years they had 700 or something. But it happens at OSU Tulsa, right across downtown. And it's Friday during the day, and there's probably like a dozen tracks of different topics and talks. Well, schedule. So they've got like machine learning, cloud, security, mobile, IoT, developers, game dev, database, agile, leadership, all this other kind of stuff. So they have tons and tons of topics. So that's this Friday. It is free. You just show up. I think it's like they do bring a can of food for the food bank or bring $2 or something like that. But yeah, so that's a really cool one going on this Friday. If you can swing it, it's very cool to check out. Yep.
This Thursday is Tulsa Game Fest as well.
Yes. Yeah.
We are probably not going to be doing it in here. We're probably going to be doing it in the back. There's some reasons for that we won't get into.
Okay.
It's not going to be located up here this week.
Okay, so that's Thursday here at 36, but not out in this space in the back. So if you're into game devs, come back on Thursday for Tulsa Game Devs. And then this weekend is Django Girls Tulsa. So who is here for Django Girls Tulsa Install Fest and stuff? Cool, okay, we got a few people. So we're going to do a breakout where we will work on installing Python and Django on your machines to get ready for Saturday. So Saturday is our one-day workshop for teaching Python and Django, like kind of your first coding experience, building a website, all that good stuff. So that's going to be Friday and Saturday. All the student spots are already filled and all the coaches are already taken. So I don't know why I'm telling you this, except, that's going on. You can't get into it unless you already signed up. But I guess, if you really know someone who really, really, really wants to go, then yeah, just come see me and we'll find them a spot somehow. And then July 31st, Lambda Lunch. Where's Darren? Tell us about Lambda. Yeah, you just took a bite. That'll teach you to eat.
Shame on me. We'll be talking about concurrency with Erlang, specifically the actor model that Erlang indicated we could talk more. So I hope you guys come. Please RSVP on leo.com.
All right. And then August 3rd is a Friday. I'm giving a Bitcoin and cryptocurrency talk at Tulsa Library during lunchtime. So you can look at the Tulsa. Is Caitlin here? Did she wander in? No, I don't see her. Okay, so just check out either this link or the Tulsa Library events calendar. It should be on there by now. And then August 4th, there is a She Codes OKC Django workshop that is definitely not for trademark reasons called Django Girls OKC, but is effectively what I just said. So the same kind of thing, it's going on in OKC. So if you know someone who's in the OKC area and may want to do what we're doing in Tulsa, that's going to happen in OKC. Kendall, do you know if they still need coaches, students?
They need coaches and students.
Coaches and students to sign up. So that is django-okc.techlahoma.org, apparently.
The website is up.
Oh, okay.
Hey, look at that, it is.
Yay! So, if you know someone who maybe is in OKC and wants to do a Django Girls-like thing, then come talk to us about that. Tulsa UX, did Max wander in here? Any of the other Tulsa UX organizers in here? I don't see any. So that'll be August 14th. And then November 1st, save the date, that's Thunder Plains 2018. I think that's all that I know about. Anything else to add? Did anybody add anything while I was standing up here? No. All right, so we've come a long way from the days where the only things happening in Oklahoma for tech was like the SharePoint user group once every 3 months. So, a lot of stuff going on. Any questions on that stuff? Anyone stick their hand up in front of 46 people and go, I've got a question? That's always fun. Okay, so we've got a few breakouts. So what I'm going to do is let the people who are hosting or organizing a breakout for tonight give us like the 1 minute long pitch for your breakout. And we'll start with Carson. Give us the 1 minute long summary of your breakout.
So we're talking tonight about progressive web apps. So progressive web apps are a way that we as web developers can actually solve a problem where we don't have a connection, our app doesn't work. We don't have a network connection, the app just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So there have been a lot of really smart people in a lot of different companies that have pushed this forward. Some of the sort of because our titles look a little bit what they are, and share a little code and a bunch of stuff there.
Cool. There's nothing for Tulsa Ruby today. Code for Tulsa. OSCN research.
Is that the repo link?
Do I need to click on that?
Yeah. Okay, so if you were at Hack Night 2 weeks ago, I promised I was working on a repo. It's out there now. What I'm attempting to do, can you go to the Springboard Network? All right, so the Oklahoma Springboard Network has all of their records out there on this really ancient 1995-ish website. And so if you want to know anything about, can you guys hear me? Is this, okay. Yeah, whatever.
I'm going to yell, but like be this far away when you yell.
Okay, all right.
Is this your test?
Yeah, this is just, go. All right, so if you want to know about a arrest record or a case, this is it. So if you're a researcher trying to find out about cases in all of Oklahoma, you have to go to every county and you have to pull up this page. So the idea behind this repo is a Python library that is a simple API for saying, give me information on this case. So quickly, this is just the very first of it. There's a lot of work to be done. There's basic documentation help. There's some expert things about how to package a Python package for distribution. There's also very basic, here use Python to parse a web page, which there's examples and you can dig in and help out. So come to that and I'll tell you more.
Is Jill here?
She's not.
Okay. Okay, so that's the OSCN breakout, and then we're going to have, like I said, the Python and Django install fest for Django Girls Tulsa. So if you're here for that, let me get a quick count of how many people are going to work on the OSCN Code for Tulsa breakout. More people keep putting hands up. You only get one vote, people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so that's about 10. And then how many people are here for Django Girls, Python, and Django Install Fest? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Beat you by 1, OSCN people. Take that. And then everyone else, I think, is progressive web apps. So anyone sticking here for that? Okay, so what we'll do, I think we'll do progressive web apps in here because it's like the most presenty type. For the Install Fest, I think we should probably use the boardroom. Think, and then Dungan, do you want to use which one do you want to use? Video or stand? You want to take people back to a standing or?
Back to standing.
Okay, standing north. You want to see if it's empty before? See if it's booked.
Do we have this one too?
Yeah, we can do that one if you want.
Yeah, so we'll be in here.
Okay, so we'll do, in the big room here, we'll do Progressive Web Apps Talk. If you're here for Python and Django Install Fest, for Django Girls, that's going to be in the boardroom, which is just on the other side of that wall right there. It's the room back there. And then if you're here, if you want to work on OSCN stuff, that's going to be right here, and Video North is this door right here. So we'll break out now, grab any food if there's any left, or any other drinks that you need. Head to your breakouts. Thanks everyone for coming. That's it. You're up, man. What's that?
Oh, that's interesting.
Slipping.
A little bit.
You'll want to make sure you're plugged into power as well. Good. Do you have any audio to play?
I do not. Can you guys read that? Is that contrasty enough? Oh, I can almost guarantee they can't.
Can you read that?
Is that contrasty enough for you? Cool.
We are going to bring this up for you.
Yeah, well, I can speak loudly.
Oh, no, this is for the stream.
I know.
Okay.
That's why I was moving it away from you.
Oh,
From me.
It's,
So then,
yeah, it's a
so then-
directional mic, so we have to be conscientious about it here.
nope, that was a really bad idea. Because I don't have this memorized. Either way. So I guess I'm just waiting for someone. and blue shirt. Yeah. We ready to get started? Okay. Just let me know when.
Yeah, send me an email and we'll get it set up. Cool. Thanks, man.
All right, I will let you know probably by tomorrow morning.
Lovely. Thanks, man.
Yeah, unfortunately. I have a bunch of stuff I have to deal with in the city tomorrow.
Okay.
Otherwise.
Talk like you're talking to the audience.
Can you hear me? Can you guys in the back actually hear me? Do I need to speak up? No? Cool. You good?
You're good? Okay, give me just a moment.
Cool. So I guess we will go ahead and get started. So like everyone has said, or I guess Lucas said tonight, so my name is Carson McKinstry. And I'm actually going to talk about progressive web apps. So sort of the tagline of this is web apps, but without the web. So who am I? So I'm a web developer for Phlogistics LP. Got to put the LP on there. So primarily there, I'm actually a React developer. So I spend all day working on different software that our mechanics use for basically creating work orders when they're out in on site. So we actually are a oil field service company. So our mechanics are pretty much all over the place in the United States at this point. So I'm also a PWA enthusiast, and I'll get to that here in a second, about reason why. So here's the problem. So web apps traditionally don't work offline. That's pretty much it. So the reason that's a problem for us is because we work primarily in, our mechanics work primarily in remote locations, that's not always an option. Sometimes they don't have connection, sometimes they have shoddy connection. And so one of the things that we want to try and do is actually sort of mitigate that, make that a little less of an issue. So for traditional web apps, and actually traditional apps in general, so oftentimes they rely on a browser, as well as having an internet connection. So nothing about them can be run in the background. So any sort of background processes you want, any sort of like sync scripts that you want to run, those have to have an internet connection. And lastly, and this isn't necessary for native apps, but for web apps, they can't be installed to your computer. You can save a bookmark, but that doesn't do much. Or so we thought. So a lot of really smart people that I don't know the names of at Google, Mozilla, Microsoft, and Apple have actually come up with this sort of way to create what they have dubbed progressive web apps. So what that actually means is that we are trying to create a web application that is reliable, fast, and engaging. So one of the things that a lot of people like to say is that progressive web app and PWA is actually a marketing term for this sort of user experience. And in fact, it's just a bunch of different technologies sort of cobbled together to create these experiences. So the first thing we have to talk about is reliability. So like I said before, if you don't have an internet connection, most applications aren't going to run. Most web applications just aren't going to run. No matter what your browser does to try to cache it, automatically cache it, doesn't always work. So one of the things we try to do is we try to mitigate that with here's three of the things that they have to sort of do. So a lot of this is actually taken from, I do a lot of work in Chrome. So a lot of the sort of references are going to be back to Chrome. And I'll explain that here in a minute. So some of the things that the Google developers actually sort of suggest is we don't ever want to see that dinosaur game ever pop up. You never really want to tell the user that they don't have a connection. You might say, hey, you don't have a connection, so you can't send stuff off, but we're going to continue to do stuff with it. With, say, your requests, any HTTP calls, we're going to do something with those, but you just won't know about it. And the other thing is that actually you can launch from the home screen. So that's something kind of new in the web world, is actually taking an application, installing it to the person's home screen, and it just works. Apple has actually had that for a while with their specific meta tags and their specific link tags, but it doesn't do exactly what we want to do. So the other really big thing is that your app needs to load up quickly. it's not in here, but one of the statistics says if your user has to spend 30 seconds or 3 seconds on a loading screen, there's a really high percentage of a chance that they will actually leave. So loading quickly is super helpful. That sort of caveats nicely into speed. So these have to be fast. So JavaScript is, people say it's not fast, but it is a fairly fast language, especially for what, especially for the things that the V8 engine has actually done. Some of the other things is actually, so it loads quickly. User interactions happen instantaneously, so like you would normally expect from a native application. And directly from the developers, the Chrome developers themselves, no janky scrolling. So a lot of web apps nowadays, if you use them on mobile, scrolling isn't great. And then finally, engagement. So like I said, you have to be able to install it to your home screen. You have to offer a full screen experience. And I'll get to why that's important here in a little bit. And the other thing that's really cool that we're actually going to be using is you are actually able to, or you can utilize these technologies to re-engage your users with push notifications. So that's something only native apps could do for a long time, but with the introduction of the notification API in most browsers, that's not an issue anymore. So they work offline, and no good tech demo is finished without a cheesy GIF. So the first thing we have to, so we're actually going to start talking about some of the tools that we use. So we've got, first things first, we're actually going to talk about service workers. So what a service worker is, it's a web worker inside of your browser. So a web worker is just something that opens up a separate process inside of the browser. So that lets you do large calculations, basically hands off all of these processes you don't need the UI to hold up for. So things like I said, large calculations, so like database inserts, dealing with making HTTP requests. You don't see that as much, but a service worker is just a type of web worker. So the special thing about them is they actually work in the background. So they work without your user ever knowing. So there's no, it works in the background and it actually will work whether the person's in the app or not. They do have a life cycle, so they'll only stay live for a minute or two unless there's some long-running process inside of it, at which point once it's done, once that process is done, it will kill itself, basically. But they can be respun up by either a sync request or basically the user interacting with the page. So the big thing about these is they actually act as a proxy layer to the network. So there's no, so what they do is that it allows us to then capture connections or capture HTTP requests, capture push events, capture notification events, and sync events, and actually act upon them. So before we really couldn't do that easily. And the other big thing is they actually allow us to do background syncs. So whether that's with the native background sync API, which is in there right now, or with some other fallback, it just sort of works at this point. So sort of on the vein of service workers, Google has been great, and they have released what's called Workbox. So this is something I use at work, and I've been doing a lot of research on to get it to work. And so what this does is it gives us a nice thin wrapper around everything that we really want to do with a service worker. So the API for the service workers is horrendous. It can be a little bit daunting, especially with with caching. It's just not something you want to do by yourself. So what they've done is they've actually created Workbox. So it handles things like pre-caching. You can intercept routes with it. You can cache routes. So say you make a request to a route to get some piece of information, you can go ahead and cache that, and the service worker will respond with the cached information before it ever touches the network. And again, background sync stuff. So they've actually got a very specific API for background sync. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in Safari right now. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't work in Safari. We'll get to that later. Yeah, so that's Workbox. And so they've got, I don't have it on this slide, but one of the parts, without getting too in-depth about the technicalities of what Workbox is doing in the background, so they've got different strategies for caching information. So do I want my request to go through the network first? So if the network fails, it's going to fall back to the cache. Do I want it to be cached first? So I go through the cache directly, and then if I've got a connection, I'll try to use the network. And then there's a couple others that that sort of riff on both of those to give a more seamless updating experience. So the next technology we've got to talk about is IndexedDB. So IndexedDB is a NoSQL transactional database that lives inside of your browser. So most major browsers nowadays actually support it. Opera Mini, not at all. That's neither here nor there. But what this database is for storing large amounts of structural data. So we're talking JSON, we're talking files, globs of just random information. So all of that can be stored inside of IndexedDB. So like I said, it lives in the browser. It works offline. So this is the big reason why we use it a lot. So it works without an internet connection. So it's only in your browser, and it only ever interacts with that one thing. The other thing about this is that it is, forget the word for it. It's siloed to the domain that you instantiated database on. So you can't go out to any user's browser and find their data. And the other thing is it's persistent. So a lot of the other types of storage that we've got, so local storage, session storage, cache storage, all of those are typically volatile and won't survive a clear cache and cookies. This one does, for the most part, depending on how the person decides to wipe out their browser. So yeah. So again, like everything in the web, the API sucks. Trying to deal with IndexedDB without a wrapper is like trying to pull teeth. It's very much, it's callback based, so you get into callback hell. It's not a fun experience. So what, again, this isn't from Google, this isn't from some company. A great group of guys one guy actually created Dexy. So Dexy is a thin wrapper around IndexedDB, so it allows you to do everything you might want to do. So access tables, access collections, access transactions. So anything that you might need to do with normal database access, you can do with Dexy. It's just easier. So it's also promise-based. So instead of having to deal with callbacks, you are dealing with promises, which in general are easy to deal with. And they also support async await, which is the new hotness nowadays. So what Dexy actually gives us, like I said, it's a wrapper. It actually gives us a sort of MongoDB-like interface to the database, to this store on your hard drive. It also actually allows you to, it has an interface for syncing with remote servers. Obviously, your server has to be set up to accept it, and I actually haven't screwed with that all that often. So the other library for IndexedDB is PouchDB. So do I have anybody that uses CouchDB in here? Cool. So this actually hooks right into CouchDB. So what this actually, it offers the same sort of wrapper that Dexy gives you, but you have to use it in conjunction with CouchDB. So syncing is a first-class citizen in both of these, in both PouchDB and CouchDB, mostly because you're dealing with real-time storage. So those are sort of some of the technologies that we're using nowadays to actually work on these progressive web apps. So the final tool that I want to talk about is Lighthouse. And I'll give you a demo of this here in a minute. So Lighthouse was created by Google. It lives in your browser. So it can do lots of different audits on your web app. So you can do things like performance audits, let's see, checks for best practice, SEO audits. So if you're not familiar with Ally, it's the accessibility audits. And the big thing is they do PWA audits. So the reason why you have this tool, the reason why you need this tool is to figure out if your user can actually use your PWA offline, if it will install to the user's browser, if it'll install to user's phone or their computer. So it's in Chrome right now. It's inside of the DevTools, and it's also a standalone extension. Okay, so PWAs can be installed. So this is something that it sort of blew my mind that this could actually happen. So how do we actually do this? So right now, it's kind of a mixed bag. So this is mostly experimental technology. Most of the things that actually you can do with PWAs is in like stage 1 or stage 0, or I guess stage 1 and stage 2. Some of it in stage 0 and accepted. But so for the most part, most browsers will sort of support it. So Chrome supports it, Firefox supports it, and some of them are a little bit lagging. So installing itself is actually fine in both Chrome and Edge, but they're both locked behind flags, which is unfortunate. But that, for the most part, that doesn't matter. So the name of the game here is progressive enhancement. So we build our apps in a way that allows us to take advantage of these things as they become available, rather than trying to do backwards compatibility. So that's sort of a little bit of a sidestep. Most mobile browsers nowadays do actually allow you to install PWAs just fine. Chrome and Firefox, they actually have specific criteria that you have to meet. We'll get into those here in a minute. After which they will actually fire an event into your browser, which you just capture and you respond to in some way. In Chrome specifically, you have to use a user-generated gesture, so a touch, a click, a key press or something, in order for them to initiate that install process. So Microsoft is weird. They want your PWA in their stores, which I don't quite understand. Didn't dig too much into that, mostly because I don't deal with Microsoft. So I don't deal with Internet Explorer or Edge most of the time. And Safari, bless their souls, have repurposed the good old add to home screen button. So that's been in there since iOS 3, I believe. So you can add a web page as a bookmark to your home screen, and nowadays they've taken that out, sort of, and turned it into a, hey, let's install your thing to the home screen. So the next big thing that you actually need in order to call yourself a PWA developer is a web app manifest. So this is like any other manifest you would have for mostly Android applications, but it's in browser, obviously. So it's just meta information. So you've got a name, you've got a short name, you've got icons for different screen sizes and different, as well as splash screens for different pages. You declare a display mode, and I'll show you what that means here in a minute. You can do orientation lock sometimes. So some browsers will support it, some don't. We won't get into that too much. You have an entry point URL. So what this entry point URL is for is when you lose connection, your app still needs to know, the browser still needs to know, where do I go? What do I load up in order to show the user the app? So typically I just set this to like an index.html file, and that's been cached already, and you're good to go. There's a lot more that you can actually add to these. So GCM IDs, app IDs. There's some Apple-specific things you have to put in there for push notifications, if they'll ever not be Apple. Anyway, so we'll move on. So Safari, we need to talk. So who here uses Safari as their primary browser? Good. Okay, one person. A little bit. So this is kind of how I feel right now. So in leading up to this talk, I was working on the demo that I was working on. And so I use Apple products all the time. I like the ecosystem, everything's great about them, but they've got problems, specifically in the web app space. One of those big issues is, so let's go through some of the issues. So they don't use web app manifest. Some of it is used, most of it's not. You actually have to have Apple-specific meta tags and Apple-specific link tags in order for things to work. So which I'll show here in a minute. So they don't support push events, they don't support notifications just yet, they don't do background sync. For the most part, that's all fine. You just put in something that handles that outside of that. So we're actually having to build, at work, I'm having to build a sync script that runs inside of a service worker, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, so Safari, like I said, has some problems. So a lot of these problems are going to be remedied in future releases of the browser, or of the iPhone itself. So I failed to mention, this is mostly on mobile that these problems sort of pop up. But yeah, so they'll hopefully get those fixed sometime soon. A lot of the fixes are in the technology preview right now. Excuse me. So with that sort of out of the way, so how do we do this? What do we have to do in order to get these things to work? So step one, make sure that your mobile app is responsive, or your web app is mobile responsive. Can't tell you how many times I've gone to a website and it doesn't have a mobile version of it, or the media queries just don't work. It's not a fun user experience, so they have to be sort of native-like in your execution. If you're already designing from a mobile-first perspective, you're good to go. Shouldn't be an issue. You have to add, so the second step is to add navigation. So not doing this can screw things up tremendously. So in normal applications on Android, you have a back button. In iOS, you don't. You just simply don't. You've also got a lot of touch gestures, and a lot of swiping, and a lot of different ways to move around the app. So the thing is if you put your app into standalone mode, it gets rid of the toolbar. So it gets rid of the search bar, it gets rid of navigation icons, it gets rid of the refresh buttons. So you have to give a user ways to do all of that without it being intrusive. So some of the ways you can do this, so obviously a menu navigation works. Swipe navigation is what I like to use. You can also give a back button. Some of the other ones you can sort of mimic from native applications, so like that little bar at the bottom, at least on Apple. I believe in Android the normal is to use, like I said, so that menu navigation. Next thing, you need to create home screen icons and a splash page. So if you put your app in a standalone mode, again, you have to give those things in order for everything to work out. Otherwise, you get glitchy, and you'll actually see here in a minute. And if you download my demo onto your phone, it may not work entirely unless you have an iPhone X, because that's all I had time for. So at the very least, you need two icons. So you need one at 192 pixels and one at 512 pixels. Both of those go into your app manifest and your manifest.json file, and they'll tell your browser how to deal with it, and your browser will just know how to deal with it. So Apple does, again, love Apple, but my God. So they require specific sizes for every single one of their devices. There are some ways to get around it, but for the most part, if it doesn't find one that it can use, it won't even try. So like I said, on iOS, you actually have to add links and meta tags into the head of your file. Yeah.
You say you need two iPhones. Why wouldn't you just use like a interface that like simulates the iPhones instead of actually owning them?
It's a good question. I actually do have a simulator open. I ran out of time getting things set up. Yeah. So they're. Pardon? Oh yeah, so I was asked if why not just use simulators, and frankly the answer is just I ran out of time. Didn't get a chance to test everything that I wanted to test, because I'll explain that here in a minute. So the next thing you need to do is you need to create a service worker. At the very minimum, you need to handle a fetch event. I'll show you how to do that here in a second. So in most cases, if you're using a build system, it typically will handle this for you. So if you use Webpack and you combine it with something like Workbox, Webpack will generate a pre-cached manifest and Workbox will just handle it. You have to do a little bit of setup, but it takes those files, caches them, and then serves them instead of trying to make network connections. So some of the other things that you can do is capture notification events, capture push events, sync events. Sync events are a little bit odd. Couldn't get them to fire at all, no matter what I tried in testing environments, simply because the time that those are fired is when you lose the internet connection and then you regain it. And your app has to be running when you lose the internet connection. It's weird, but it's odd. The other thing, like I said, is you can capture and or cache network events, fetch events. So that will be anything like any sort of HTTP request, any XHR request. All of those are captured with this event. So the other thing is you actually have to serve this over HTTPS. There's no way around this. Service workers don't work on HTTP connections. It's just in the spec. It's one of those things, it's a security risk to allow these things to run outside of a secure context. Specifically because this is something that you could potentially build malicious software for. That you could get in a lot of trouble for, basically. So having that HTTPS, it supposedly sort of protects you from those liabilities. So one of the things that is a little bit odd about this is if you are on localhost, this works just fine. It works without an HTTPS connection, and because obviously it's on your local machine. So if you don't do this, your service worker will flat out refuse to install, and you'll get a nice little error message, and you'll have to deal with that somehow. The last thing is to test it. You need to test literally everything, mostly because these apps go out and they sit on a person's device for a long time, and they may or may not update. There are ways built in to allow them to update sort of on the fly, but you need to do a lot of testing. So you need to do visual tests. So you need to make sure that it works fine on mobile, it works fine on desktop, it works fine on a tablet. Basically, anywhere that you could potentially use it, you'll need to test that. You need to make sure that your service worker tests, or your service worker works. So you have to make sure it installs, make sure it's being served over HTTPS, make sure basically anything about it works. So the next thing, you need to make sure that it works offline. So this is something that I ran into this weekend and uncovered a bug in WebKit. So as I was working on my application, I was doing all these tests, making sure that things work in Safari Mobile. So that's what I was using for doing some of my testing. And I was just using my own iPhone X, and for whatever reason, it works fine in the browser. Turn off the internet connection, it works just fine. I add it to my home screen, turn off the internet connection, doesn't work. So there's actually an issue with WebKit, which I won't get into necessarily, but it has to do with not following imports inside of your service worker, inside of an import script call. And then lastly, make sure to run Lighthouse audits. So what this audit allows you to do is it allows you to see some of the problems that your application has before it'll ever try to allow the user to install something to their home screen. So Chrome actually has a list of 10 things that you actually have to do before it will ever fire off an install event. Actually, it's a install prompt. And if you don't pass all of those criteria, it won't do it. It just flat out refuses to do it. So yeah, so if you've got a phone or if you've got a computer, you can go to this link right here. I'll leave it up for just a second. So this is just something I put together fairly quickly. That's got some basic interactions, basic animations that you would sort of expect from a native mobile application. So things like swiping between screens. Yeah, that's about it, honestly. And then it's got swipe gestures on a couple of the features. And this works offline. So I'm sorry if you have an iPhone. This won't work in standalone mode if you install the app. So like I said, and I'll demo this here in a second, it just doesn't work. We'll get into that here in a second. So let me show you this. So here is the app. So if you don't have your phone out, so this is just a really simple note-taking application. So you can add notes. This does support Markdown. So if you decide to use this, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you decide to use this, it works just fine. So this, hello, Tulsa web devs. So it works fine without any sort of weird things, basically. So the other thing is up in the top corner, and this will only work on Chrome and Firefox at the moment. You've got a little icon for Android, for installing the app. So if you actually do that, it will give you a little prompt to say, hey, do you want to install this app? And I say yes, and it adds it to my Chrome apps. So here it is. So if I open it up, it opens up in a new window. It's got no, so this is what I was talking about with standalone mode. So standalone mode doesn't work, doesn't give you it basically acts like a normal application. So there's no search bar, there's no address bar, there's no navigation buttons. It's just what you see is what you get at this point. And so this can actually be, so on Mac at least, you've got an application that is installed to your hard disk that you can call at will. So, and I'll show you guys on iPhone, and then show you guys the bug. So add to home screen. So it's giving you a nice little prompt. And you've got an application on the phone. So if you don't give a splash screen, this is what you get until it loads. And it's being really slow right now. I don't know why. There you go. So it looks like a native application, sort of works like a native application. So again, hello Tulsa web devs. And view. I'm gonna go back. And it's just what you get. So it's got some swipe navigation or swipe gestures as well. So for deleting. And you can also go back with swipe gestures. So now let me sort of show you what this does when it's offline. So I'm gonna kill my connection. I'm gonna close this out. Close this one out. If it'll do it. So let's go ahead and try and open up my app again just on the desktop. Still works. I don't have a connection. It works just fine. To prove it, I'm in the browser. So let's do, works just fine without an internet connection. Pretty cool. In Safari on mobile, works just fine. So it's serving from a cache. Here's the problem though. And this is actually a problem, partially a problem with the library that I'm using for doing my service workers. But there's a problem with WebKit that I won't get into. And I get the good old Safari can't open this page. I don't know why this was happening. I banged my head on the table for probably 10 hours on Saturday trying to get this thing to work before I finally came across a GitHub issue from the creators of Workbox saying this is an issue with WebKit. There's not much we can do until the technology preview is out in, I believe, 11.4. So yeah. So I will go back to that. So yeah, so that's very basic, very simplistic demo of what this thing can do. Oh, I actually did want to show you guys. Can you guys see that in the back? Do I need to switch to the light version? Okay. Oops. Somebody quick, tell me how to do it. Okay, is that better for everyone? Cool. So, inside of your Chrome Web Tools, DevTools, you've got this tab called Audit. So this is Lighthouse. So this is what I was talking about earlier. And I'm going to perform an audit real quick. Close this. Show you what that sort of process looks like. So while that's running, so what this is doing is it's going through and it's checking off these little checkboxes that Google has in order to basically say, yes, I will install this event, or I can install this application on your computer. And every other time I've done this, it has run really, really quickly, and I'm gonna let that run. So what else can PWAs do? So obviously, all this stuff is really fine and dandy, but a lot of times people use native applications because they can access a whole lot of other features that PWAs can't. I know why that's not running. Thank you. So yeah, so what else can PWAs do? So right now, you can do anything on the left-hand side. You can access the camera and the microphone. That's been around for a while. You can do notifications. That's been around for a couple years. You can install it to the home screen. You can get access to location services. Offline storage is an option. So like I said, IndexedDB, cache storage, all those. You can access Bluetooth. This was really interesting to me. Some browsers will actually allow you to access any Bluetooth devices attached to the computer or paired with the computer. Same thing with USB devices. As well, you can do a lot of AR and VR stuff. So if you guys know the library A-Frame, that allows you to create these VR environments inside of a browser. I don't know how it works. It's a little bit of GPU magic, and there's a flag for the web GPU that you have to turn on in order for things to work 100%. So the other side of the screen, there's a lot more things that you want out of your device. For the most part, these are experimental features, and not every device is going to support them. So I found this in my research. I found this awesome website called whatwebcando.today. And this gives you sort of a rundown of everything that the browser you are currently using can do. Let me zoom in. So, like I said, you can access most of the camera and microphone features. So RTC is something that a lot of companies are getting into nowadays for some reason. So that's something that you can do at least in Chrome. Same thing with a lot of native behaviors. So you can access permissions, you can access notifications, you can do pretty much all of those. And you can allow for, like I said, so what makes a lot of PWAs great is these seamless experience things. So offline mode, background sync, doing payments. And then there's a lot of other things. You can peruse this at your leisure. This sort of gives you an idea. So if you click on one of these, so say an FC, it gives you sort of an overview of how things are going to work, or at least how they should work. And then basically tells you if it's not supported in your browser and why. So yeah, so that's a pretty cool thing. And if anybody noticed, up at the top, this is one of those applications that does support installing to the browser. They have a little banner. So yes, I want to install this. So just like the app that I showed you earlier, I now have an app in my Chrome Apps folder. I can put that on my dock. I can put that pretty much anywhere. And it's also in my apps on Chrome. So it opens up in standalone mode. Some of this is behind flags. I will warn you for that. But it works just like my app would. And it works offline. It works just fine. So let's kill that. Let's go ahead and perform an audit real quick. Of course. Okay, we're not going to perform an audit. Yeah, so what this is going to do, like I said, it goes through sort of a list of criteria, and you see it doing things in the background. So what this is doing is it checks to see if basically this thing works offline. Then it turns off JavaScript, sees if it shows something on the screen. And then it goes through and checks internet speed, like connection speed. So let's go through. So the failed audit, that top one, the page not loading on 3G is a little hit or miss. You can't actually test that properly without a true 3G connection, and it doesn't always work. So this is that list of things that can you guys read that? This is that list of things that I said you actually have to double check. So it has to register a service worker, and I can show you that here in a second. It responds with a 200 when it's offline, so that's handled with your service worker. It will capture that fetch event and serve from a cache rather than trying to make a network call. So if JavaScript's not available, it still shows something. In my case, I'm using Create React App, which just shows, hey, you need JavaScript to use this. Other thing is it has to be served over HTTPS, and any HTTP traffic has to be redirected to it, to HTTPS. I've done that with some fanciness on Heroku, so it's not a huge deal. So the other thing is that the user actually will get prompted to install the web app. So the way they test this is to make sure that it's a before install prompt event gets fired on window. You capture that. There is a prompt function inside of the event that you just store somewhere and then call at your leisure. Next thing is you've configured a custom splash screen. So it didn't show up on iOS, but it will show up on Android if my tester was not lying to me. Address bar matches brand colors. That's neither here nor there. That doesn't really matter for most things. You actually have to have a viewport meta tag, and then content is sized correctly for the viewport. So these are those things that Chrome will check for before it ever fires well, some of the things that it'll try to check for before it fires that event. And the Chrome developer network actually has those criteria on their website. So, before we get into code, are there any questions?
You mentioned updating.
Mhm.
So if the user installs it and then changes online and they come back with connection, how does the update process work?
So that's all handled inside of your service worker. So there is a way to do it. So whenever your user re-enters the page, it will. So he asked what happens when you push out an update to your app. So what happens is the service worker will capture that. It's going to go out and try to fetch that resource, and it's going to say, oh, there's a new thing out there, and it should update that. Obviously, it can fall through sometimes. So you just have to put in checks to make sure that happens.
The user has no choice in.
No.
Okay.
That's, yeah.
And like, let's say, so first, if you serve cache info,
Mhm.
and then it realizes you're not update, is that a bad experience because they're doing something and then everything changes, or?
It can be a bad experience. So there are ways to get around that. So the way that what we do, so Workbox, so the service, so he asked, so what happens when you're serving information and then that information changes, and the user doesn't have a choice in that. So what happens typically is for our web apps, we use a strategy called stale. Stale while update, I believe, is the strategy in Workbox. So what that does is it will serve cache first, but then it'll go and try to make a network call. And if it gets new data, it will reinsert it and update that cache. So any other questions? Yeah.
You briefly touched upon this. You said there was something like an issue with the HTTP, which I'm assuming is like an address that calls, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Okay. You said there's an issue. A, why would it be unreliable? B, is there a workaround?
So she asked if there was so issues with HTTP. So that's actually just most browsers won't accept things that aren't over an SSL connection nowadays, or it'll actually warn the user. Typically, that's a bad experience. So there's nothing worse than a user getting this warning, hey, I don't trust this source, before trying to get into the app. So that's why they do that. So the second half of the question, if you'll repeat it.
What's the workaround?
So the workaround is there is none. So unfortunately, if you aren't serving over HTTPS, your service worker won't install, and it'll never activate, which means you can't serve anything from cache. It's more for users' peace of mind than anything else. But it's also sort of a way to tell the user, I'm not trying to install anything malicious on your system. So yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yep.
It's the biggest thing that PWAs can do. We were mentioning things that they can do as opposed to native apps. That, logistics that you wish that native apps can do.
Yeah, so one of the things that we are looking at is things like, and I can show you this list. And I don't want to get too in depth on what we actually want to do, but we do have sort of some ideas for geofencing. And right now, not every browser does it. So mostly our users are going to be using laptops, and Chrome on desktop doesn't actually support geofencing just yet. Oh, and the question was, so what are some of the native things that, what are some features that native does that we might want in a PWA? So that's one of the big ones. We're still in the works at this point, but that's something I would like to see in the future. Potentially the proximity sensors, but most everything that's on this list is stuff that we would use in a production application. So yeah.
Is there a mechanism that will allow you to make your website aware of whether a user has ever installed it on your system? I noticed you did the install for that what you went through today site.
Yeah.
But you're still seeing hey, did you know this is something you can install banner at the top?
So if I actually reload the page, it should go away. Yeah.
Okay, that was just a tab that was already open.
Yeah. So it was having some. I don't actually know why. But so the way that you actually test that is you don't. You test to see if it's in standalone mode. So if it's in standalone mode, and I'll show you how to do that here in a second, you can sort of assume that it's installed. Now, if you want to see if they've installed it in the past, that would have to be done with something like adding a tag to like the manifest.json, or adding a query parameter that gets sent back to the server and then cached somewhere. So I think I saw two more questions. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of the things, since you're running a service worker after it's installed, you could probably just change a URL request,
Yeah.
or a request that's coming in, and say, yes, I'm installed, instead of no, I'm not.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. And I think there was a question in the back.
Yeah. You scrolled up, I think that kind of answers it. I was going to ask, could you use like some sort of authentication for your phone, like fingerprint or face?
So yeah.
Authenticate some part?
Yeah, so there was something. There was a rabbit hole that I went down a couple days ago, sort of trying to figure that out, because that's one of those things. So he asked about authentication. So can you use fingerprint scanner? Can you use like the code, like the PIN, or like the whatever you guys use on Android. So yes and no. So right now it's in stage 1, which basically means they want to put it into the spec, but it's not there yet. And it is a very, we're talking experimental of experimental features. So let me see. I do have there's an article I was reading about it, but that is something that's going to be possible very soon. It's just not yet. But yeah, no, you're right. That's one of those things that would really help for us. So one of the things that I found really cool about that is there's a company that's actually creating USB keys that you plug in your computer and you use them for authentication to web apps. Using, there's a protocol that I can't remember it's like FIDO or something like that. Yes. But it's not yet implemented in most browsers. Yeah. Okay. So I've got some resources for you. So basically, searching around on the internet, you can find a lot of information about this, but these are sort of the best resources aside from my last one. So Google has a service worker page that basically sort of outlines what a service worker does, how to use it, how to build one from scratch. There's the Google PWA page, which gives you sort of, again, an overview of what PWA is, and then how to create one. And then Mozilla, they also have a service worker page as well that, again, outlines how to create one from scratch. And then I did take some notes, so I've got a GitHub page, which I will pass on to. So this is the repo for that application that I created. And inside of that repo, on the README, I've got sort of basically my notes and my thoughts about while I was working on sort of these demo applications and trying to figure things out, basically. So there's a lot of stuff here. So this is in React, so if you are familiar with React, it should be fine. If you're in Angular world, I'm sorry. Yeah, so there's a lot of information there, and a lot of sort of tips and tricks that I sort of figured out along the way. I believe that's it. So I wanted to get just how am I doing on time? Just a couple minutes? Okay. So real quick, I won't get into some of this. So I wanted to show you sort of an example service worker. So this is my service worker. It is using Webpack, and we're using Workbox in order to pre-cache all of the basically files for the app. So we've got so the index.html file, a hash CSS file, a hash JavaScript file, and then I think there's also an image in there. Or in the manifest, sorry, the manifest.json file. All of those get pre-cached, and then those get served up when the app is loading, as opposed to trying to make a network call. So the other thing is this fetch event listener. So this is actually required by Google and required by Chrome in order for you to be able to install your app, which I find a little annoying. But this is sort of an idea of what one of those events looks like. So you've got the event listener. So anywhere you see self in here, by the way, is referring to the context of the application itself. It's equivalent to window, but there's a lot of stuff on it that you can't get access to. So it's on the event, you've got a respond with. So this is where you're going to respond to any requests. So say you don't have an internet connection and you've got stuff in the cache for that particular route, you're gonna open up the cache, grab it, and serve it, rather than trying to make a network call. For the most part, this is done sort of behind the scenes in Workbox. So the way that I'm getting this is by using this Workbox Webpack plugin. So I give it a source for where I want to generate my own service worker. I give it a destination, so where do I want that thing to end up when I run my build, And then how do I want to serve Workbox? So in this case, I'm serving it locally, which actually might be part of my problem, but it's neither here nor there. So inside of my build, I'll show you what the service worker looks like on the front end. So what this does, and this is actually not supposed to be there. So what this does is it uses a call called import scripts, which is new-ish in ES7, I believe. What it does is it takes a bunch of strings and it tries and finds resources to fit those and then loads them into your service worker so that it works. And then there's obviously the rest of my service worker code. And the last thing I want to show is the manifest. So this is sort of a sample manifest that I put together. So it's got my short name, which is what the app will be named on the home screen. You've got a long name, which will be what is like the title of the app. You've got your icons. Every single one of these needs three things. It needs a source, it needs a size, and it needs a MIME type. If it doesn't have one of those, it just won't serve it. And then lastly, down at the bottom, we've got a start URL, a scope, the display type, the theme color, and background color. So those last two only work right now on Android, which is unfortunate. So like I said, Safari is lagging behind, so get it together. But the two important things in here is the start URL and the scope. So the scope is what you're telling your app what your service worker can do. So what things it can access. You can basically tell your service worker you're only allowed to access the files out of this one folder. And it will not go outside of that folder. And then the start URL, obviously, like I said earlier, is where your app enters when it's offline. So I did have a couple other things I want to show you, but that's, if I've got time afterwards, feel free to ask. I want to show you that. Last thing, this monstrosity is, let's not show you that one. So like I said, Apple is a little bit behind the curve, so you have to use specific meta tags and specific link tags in order for things to show up. So you've got these like Apple mobile web app status bar style, Apple mobile app capable, and then a couple others. So yeah, and then this is what you have to do in order to get startup to work. So I think you guys have questions for a couple minutes, and then yeah.